This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build great websites, to create a beautiful online presence, and to run your business. Find links in the description for 10% off your first purchase. It's about time. No pun intended. Finally, we have a smartwatch that doesn't try too hard. Now, for those of you who have followed me for quite a while now, you know my stance on full-on smartwatches. I'm not really against them, but I just think that we went a little bit too far, a little too fast. We tried to make smartwatches do so many things that we already do on our phones, and ultimately the full experience gets a bit muddled under all of that complication. But now we finally have a smartwatch that ticks off a lot of the needs that I have for a smart wearable. If you want something that's still elegant like a timepiece, but you need a little bit of your digital life to actually move away from the phone in your pocket, this might be the one you're waiting for. Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Alright, this is my full review of a watch you've all been quite curious about, the Fossil Hybrid HR. Now, the one I have on right now is actually the Collider HR. There are a few different kinds in Fossil's library, not to mention the affiliated brands like Skagen that have their own hybrid offerings. There's no doubt you're already noticing that there's a display behind those watch hands, but let's start with the analog before we get into the digital. There are indeed real watch hands on this watch, and it makes it look more like, well, a watch. Smartwatch skeptics tend to stay away from smartwatches because they still want something to look like a classical timepiece. Well, the Collider HR in this case actually fits that bill. It stays true to the old school design right down to the comfortable leather band that I have on my unit. The watch is also not too big, which is another problem I tend to have with full-on smartwatches. It fits right in with a lot of different casual and even formal outfits. I personally like that it doesn't try too hard. There are merely lines on the ring rather than other designations like numbers or a tachymeter or anything else that might be not so practical. The buttons on the side navigate the watch's functions, with the top and bottom buttons programmed as shortcuts to most used applications. More on that in a little bit. In keeping with that little bit of old school design, a double tap on the watch face activates some lights so that you can see the time or your notifications in the dark. They're not uniform, but it's like a throwback to old Timex watches that had one or two spotlights just to illuminate the time. Ultimately, for most intents and purposes, this smartwatch doesn't get too bogged down by the first part of that name. It is smart, but it also doesn't forget to just be a watch. To achieve smart functionality, the Fossil Hybrid HR brought one important new aspect, an e-paper screen. Whereas other hybrid smartwatches would just vibrate and then move the arms to designated numbers so that you know what kind of notification you brought in, this e-paper display actually shows you some of it. Now, admittedly, it's not very fast due to the nature of e-ink. It doesn't have a very high refresh rate at all, so you might need to wait a little bit every time you either press a button or when something comes in because the whole display has to refresh. For that reason, this watch is not going to seem like the snappiest one out there, but that's not really the point. It's nice that the arms actually line up properly to show you the top and bottom halves without much interruption. One neat extra feature involves a quick flick of the wrist. Doing this makes the arms do one revolution so that you can see anything that might have otherwise been blocked. This digital and analog marriage is something we've seen in other watches, by LG in particular, but having an e-paper display in this watch lowers the power draw and thus makes battery life much but. Which brings me to one of the reasons why I really enjoy hybrid smartwatches, the battery life. Fossil does say that this smartwatch can go for weeks at a time, but I do use it a lot for some of the functions that are in it, and I do get a lot of notifications. So in reality, over the last month of me using this watch, I've had to charge it maybe once every 7 days. Now, thankfully, it doesn't take too long to charge up once you have it on its magnetic proprietary charger, which, by the way, I did forget the charger when I was in Asia for a while. I went over to the Qualcomm Tech Summit, and then I realized I didn't have the charger. It lasted for about 4 days after that, and then it finally died, and I couldn't use it for the next 6 or 7 days after that. So as long as you don't forget to charge it, or you don't forget the charger rather, you can eliminate one of the biggest flaws in full smartwatches. The fact that you can't really wear them as things like sleep trackers because the general habit is to plug them in overnight for the next day's work. And you know what? You would benefit from having something like this on your wrist as you go to bed because the Fossil app illustrates the different types of details you can actually get from the tracking. Step tracking, heart rate monitoring, and sleep tracking are all included, and you can actually get a bit of useful information from the app. While it's hard to gauge sleep tracking accuracy because they tend to vary quite a bit among devices, it is nice to know that the heart rate monitor is always firing, especially when I'm asleep, so I have that extra metric. Speaking of which, the heart rate monitor stores information from periodical checks to give you a snapshot of each day. Now, this is all stuff that I didn't expect a hybrid smartwatch like this to really provide, especially at this level of detail. There's really only one place that I don't use this watch, and it's during workouts. The leather band doesn't really fit in with, let's say, gyms, or in my case, a martial arts mat. So I tend to not wear this during my workouts, but you can track workouts and you can trigger it by using one of the apps inside of the menu on the watch. But I also have to say that while it's nice to have a watch like this for measuring those metrics, their accuracy is a little bit questionable. There was a point at CES when Issa and I were running around together. We went to all of the same places, and her Fitbit Versa 2 measured over 1,000 more steps than I did with this hybrid HR. Take that for what you will, but I still think that having any of these metrics at all is impressive for a watch like this that is trying to be super minimalistic. The app also lets you customize different buttons so that you can access certain apps or control aspects of your phone like music playback. And this is where things start to look decidedly minimalistic. The apps you see in this part are all that you get. There are no extra apps like on Wear OS or Apple's Watch OS that could replace the equivalent in a smartphone. You can use the buttons to trigger simple things like workout tracking or heart rate monitoring, or one of my favorites, a timer. Here's a prime example. 3 or so minutes for green tea, 5 or so for black teas, and plenty more for herbal teas. Or, if you are so inclined, use the timer for things like the Pomodoro technique while you're trying to focus on your work. 25 minutes working, 5 minutes taking a break, and then repeat. Now, it's good that I'm doing this review right now because the app has been given some pretty massive updates since the release of the watch late last year. For example, the app now lets you pick from a number of different patterns to put on the e-ink display, so you get a little bit more extra customization on top of changing the different complications. You can even put a personal photo and it will do its best to replicate it on the watch face. But more importantly, you can actually get notifications from pretty much any application. When this watch was first released, it was only able to pull from maybe a dozen different applications, and it took a while for Fossil to finally get everything right, and now all notifications come in. In my case, my favorite is that I can finally get my Telegram messages to the watch. Of course, you can't really do much more than read the notifications. If you press the main button, you can actually read the whole notification. And for emails, you can read most of the email. But aside from that, there's not much you can do afterwards, which actually is totally fine with me. Because the main reason why I like hybrid smartwatches is they help me minimize the time I spend on my phone. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still a little bit too addicted to scrolling on things on my phone, but in the moments that matter, it's nice to get a little bit of information to the watch and then decide if I need to pop my phone out of my pocket at that point. I get a little bit more detail than typical hybrid smartwatches provide without any of the extra distractions that full smartwatches might also have. The Fossil Hybrid HR line has just enough of what I actually desire out of a smart wearable while still looking really good. The question here is whether or not you have the same needs, and if you do, $195 for a hybrid smartwatch like this might actually make a lot of sense. I do still think it makes a lot of sense as a price point. After all, the level of information you get from this e-ink display is simply impossible in other typical hybrid smartwatches. And if you're not looking for a high-end smartwatch, you can always save a little bit of money by going for one like this. As with all things, it's up to you to decide what you truly need, so let me know what your thoughts are in the comment sections down below. This watch hasn't been out for that long, and actually at CES they already started coming out with updated versions of it that have the same functionality, the same display and whatnot, but they're available in even more styles. You can check all of that out in the links in the description down below as well. Alright, shouts out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. It's easy to claim a domain or URL of your own and then use Squarespace to bring your ideas and style to life. You can make a professional website, an online store, or a portfolio. Many tools from Squarespace make websites easier. Simply put, as I mentioned before, I started building my own website using Squarespace, and it's already been pretty easy to make something that looks good and links to all of my various content. There are some extra things I want to add on here, and that involves Type 2 Foodie, a segment that I'm looking to bring back on my YouTube channel, where I talk about my life with type 2 diabetes and all of the different keto lifestyle choices that I make, including recipes, easily done on my website by adding that page so that there's one place for you to find them all. You can check out all of the tools Squarespace provides to help you get your business and online presence off the ground. Visit Squarespace for a free trial, and then when you're ready, use squarespace.com/Joshua Vergara to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now again, to be clear, I'm not swearing off full-on smartwatches, I never have. But let's be clear, I'm glad that there's something that TikToks all the right ways for me to wear it on the regular. So as always, thank you very much for watching and hope you enjoyed this review of the Fossil Hybrid HR. Finally got around to doing the review on this one, and I know some of you got into my comment sections and asked me, why are the arms on your watch moving around like that? That's just one of the fun things that you can do with this watch, but even better is the fact that it's more minimalistic and could help you with your digital wellness because it's just a place for you to see what your phone is doing without having to take your phone out all the damn time. But with all of that said, thank you so much for watching. Drop some likes on these videos and then subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Consider hitting that bell over on the side because I'm going to try to ramp up my production a lot more here. Actually, that also doubles as me trying to simplify my workflow so I can bring out more content for all of you. Get into the comment sections down below. Let me know what you think about this watch and about really anything. Let's have that discussion in the comment sections down below. And until my next video, I'm going to go ahead and just remind you to enjoy your tea, everybody. This is the one I made earlier with the timer on here. Jasmine tea, very nice.